edition In the Spotlight, brought to you, as Carly told you, by Crimson Cloak Publishing, and we'll be spotlighting one of our books between our two guests, and I'll tell you all about it. But first, let me bring on my first guest, Juliet Ruiz. Juliet is a licensed clinical social worker in the city of Las Vegas, focusing on psychotherapy for those suffering from PTSD, complicated grief, and suicidal ideation. She is the only practicing thanatologist, which is a specialist in death, dying, and bereavement in the state of Nevada. Juliet is also a newly published author of a fictional novel set in ancient Egypt, which she wrote under the pen name J. Alex Ruiz. But you can't fool us, Juliet. We know you're really a woman. Her fascination with ancient Egyptian mythology and culture dates back to her early childhood in Manhattan with the poet Helen Adam, an eccentric and powerful woman who saw magic in very dark places, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which at the time had the greatest Egyptian exhibit in the United States. The two made an indelible impression on that child that would last a lifetime. Juliet is here today to talk about her new book, Cayenne. And Juliet, am I pronouncing it right? Koyan, The Gods of Iniquity. It is an exciting, fast-paced novel that takes what we know about ancient Egypt and creates a living, breathing story. While many people are fascinated by the Sphinx or the Great Pyramids, there is a great disconnect between those long-dead people and us who live today. But people are people, and the way we interact hasn't really changed. That's part of this story. There are also the gods and magic and monsters that aren't part of our everyday life, but were very real to those people living so long ago. And at the heart of this story is a reality that is both well known and singularly ignored. He who wins writes the histories. The histories become the truth. Koyan is available as an ebook from Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, and as a paperback from Amazon. Just type Koyan and I'll spell it for you. It's Koyan as in Nancy in the search box, and it should be the first search result. I don't think there are many hits on the name Koyan. Okay, Juliet, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. Juliet, first tell us why you chose a male pseudonym.
Interesting question. I didn't particularly intend it to be male. Alexandria is my middle name, and I wanted it to be more gender neutral. So that's what I was hoping for.
Why did you write this book?
This story had been rattling around in my mind pretty much my whole life. The ancient world and the modern world became very fused for me because of my upbringing. And as you had mentioned about Helen and the Met, and I've also always had a fascination with the underdog. And in the ancient Egyptian myths about Set, Osiris, Isis, and Nephthys, Set was very much the underdog, and I always sort of thought about what that might be like. What was it like for the people who worshipped a cult that was destroyed thousands and thousands of years ago? And is everything we're actually hearing true about what that God was like. So he's one of the characters in the book that I focus on. And in history, it's pretty much established or believed that it was a power shift in the ancient world. And I kind of play around speculatively with that concept and think, what was it like for people living at that time on the ground? So that's why I wrote it. It just kind of poured out of me after being rumbling in my head for so long.
Now, in your non-writing life, you're a licensed clinical social worker and a practicing psychotherapist. Did this background help you write Koyan, and if so, how?
It did. In my studies and working to be a clinical social worker, I learned a lot about the impact of trauma and the concepts of scapegoating. So scapegoating being someone who is demonized without necessarily doing anything to deserve that demonization. And I also learned about how trauma changes behaviors and changes our perspectives. And one of the cool things about studying social work is we take into account predominant cultures and people's goodness of fit within the predominant culture. And a lot of that informed how I write. And in addition, also working with people in foster care and the foster systems, I learned a lot about how systems work and impact people's lives. So it's very, very significant in how it impacted my writing.
Now, what does the title Koyan, what does that mean?
I got the title from the movie Koyaanisqatsi, which is kind of famous for its soundtrack by Philip Glass, and it's a non-narrative film. It's only musical and visual, and it kind of talks about, or well, doesn't talk, but it portrays this very dystopic modern society. And Koyaanisqatsi means in the Hopi language life out of balance, and Katsi means life, and putting Koyan in front of that equals life out of balance. And I sort of stipulated from there, or that's not quite the right term, but that Koyan means chaos. So life out of balance, Koyaanisqatsi, Koyan equaling destruction, chaos, whatever it is that sets life out of balance.
So,
and sorry.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
And that's kind of the theme of the book.
So Koyan is not an Egyptian word, then?
No, it is not. And in the book, that's explained.
Who's the main character in the book? Tell us about him or her.
It's an ensemble cast with many characters. The most predominant one is a woman named Nunuko, and she is living in poverty in the slums, and she finds a way to sort of duke her way up the ladder. She encounters many struggles and is very triumphant in how she copes with them. Some of the other main characters are members of her family, and some of the characters are gods. And it's very interesting and challenging watching the gods, or writing the gods interacting with mortals. And it's kind of fun. And going back to my psychotherapy practices, knowing a lot about narcissism is definitely helpful in writing gods.
Uh-huh. Now, who's your target reader? Who's the ideal person to buy this book?
I think most people should find something relatable to it. Obviously, fans of ancient Egypt would enjoy it. It's kind of down and dirty in the streets in ancient times. A lot of books about ancient Egypt are written from the point of view of Tutankhamun or Hatshepsut or Cleopatra. And while there is an element of royalty in my book, it's really mostly about or from the perspective of people living and struggling.
So people who are struggling would be your ideal reader?
Possibly. I think, like I said, I think anyone can get something from it. Anyone who wants to see people rise through adversity, anyone who's interested in seeing how modern themes play out in the ancient world. For example, there are issues that are dealt with in the book, like addiction and homelessness and abuse and even prostitution. And if we look into modern times, we have struggles of sex trafficking, and obviously addiction is a huge issue. They will find something in there which can echo these modern themes. So, target audience, interesting question. Definitely anyone who wants to read about what it might have been like to live in the ancient world. But I think that people who aren't necessarily interested specifically in Egypt would also find a lot to gain from it.
Is it, since it's a pardon me, a book about struggles, would it be of interest to anybody who's struggling with anything in their life, which is just about everyone, I think?
Yes. Then the answer is yes. If it's everyone, then yes. I think that I think that anyone can find something valuable in this book. It's 600 pages. It has multiple characters. Most of them are very relatable. We cheer for the heroes. We hate the villains, and the story moves very quickly. One of my purposes in writing it was to have a very fast-paced book that didn't bog you down in a lot of over description or overly flourishy language. So it is very quick paced, and anyone who wants to escape into a book, this would be perfect for them as well.
Is it written in the first person or the third person?
It's third person omniscient, and there is a strong sense of the actor who's in whatever scene or chapter, but there is a pullback to omniscient as well, so that the reader gets sort of an overarching idea of what's going on.
What makes your book different from other novels set in ancient Egypt?
Well, again, going back to the modern psyche. So I find that when I read books about ancient Egypt, there's a bit of a disconnect between myself and the characters, because they are so grounded in what we perceive as ancient ways of speaking. A lot of people who write about ancient Egypt write in this kind of grand language. And because when we think of ancient Egypt, we think of grand schemes and these wonderful cults of worship, and it's very moody in the language and evokes that sort of distance. And I personally found that a little bit alienating. So I wanted to write something that was deeply relatable to the modern psyche, so that we can see ourselves in these circumstances. There's an old movie called Amadeus. Are you familiar with it?
I know the title. I know a little about it. I have not seen it. I'm not a moviegoer.
Gotcha. Well, in the movie Amadeus, there's a lot of modern talking that is almost shocking when you first see it. But in that usage, the characters are so depthened. They're given this quality where, like, oh my gosh, I know that guy. Like, those kind of moments, like, I could see myself hanging out with these people, and I can see why he's having the problems he's having. And in writing my book, I wanted to capture that flavor and that relatability.
And are you planning sequels?
Yes. The Koyan is the first book in a 4-book series. It will end at some point. It's not, at least my intention now is not to have it go on and on forever. Although I suppose it could. I'm writing the second book now. I'm hoping to have it out at the end of 2020. So, yes, there are 3 more books.
You'll have to come back on the show when the second book publishes.
I'd be delighted to.
Give me an email, a heads up, and we'll have you back. Meanwhile, what is it like being a newly published author? This is your first book, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I'd say the predominant feeling is terror. Being newly published, it's kind of taking this deeply, deeply private experience and putting it out to the 7.7 billion people of the world, and it's daunting and it's horrifying. We were forced to publish a little early because of a foobar someone did. And which was good, because if we hadn't have done that, I think I would have clung onto it for eternity and never let it go. So that wound up being an advantage, to just sort of put it out there and set aside any thoughts of perfectionism that may have been impeding its publication. It's very challenging. It's really thrilling when I saw the author's proofs of the paperback, to see a paperback with my words in it. That's when it hit me. Oh my goodness, I am published. The marketing piece is rather fun. I did work for a little while back in one of my previous lives, so to speak, in television and film and advertising. And it's fun to kind of tap into those skills again and get the word out there, because that's the trick, right? Is if nobody knows it exists, nobody's going to read it. So that part's been really fun. We're going to World Fantasy Con at the end of this month, and that should be very, very interesting. I've been, I was an old member of the Henderson Writers Group when I first started writing this back in 2002, 2003. And I've rejoined them to help develop book 2. And it's very encouraging and wonderful to connect with other writers. Most of my time writing this, I kind of did in solitary. I would, because I work not quite 9 to 5, but I work 8 hours, 9 hours a day at my practice. And it gives me about 2 to 3 hours in the morning, and that's it. That's what I get, plus the weekends. And it's taken me 18 years to write this.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Well, it's on and off. And I did write I've outlined all the books. But in really wordsmithing and getting this story to perfection was quite a process. And the level of sacrifice that comes with that. I mean, sacrificing time with friends and time with family and vacation. What's a vacation? I mean, it gets intense, and it's very cool to see the fruits of all this labor sort of fly out into the world. But then again, I worry too, like you want it to be successful, and there's a lot we can't control when something goes out into the atmosphere. So that's the terror portion of it. So it's sort of back and forth between being really, really nerve-wracking and really, really awesome at the same time.
You said we were forced to publish. Is that you and your publisher, or are you an indie? And if so, who's the we?
I'm an indie, and when I say we, I'm referring to my husband. He has been amazingly helpful. He's my technology capable other half, and he's the one who set everything up on Amazon and did all that piece. So that's what I mean when I say we.
Aha. It's good to have an other half who's really an other half, isn't it?
Oh yes, and there's no way I could have done this without him. We met back in 2001, 2002, and I had recently been widowed back then, and kind of got stranded here in Las Vegas. And that's really when this story started pouring out of me. I just started writing it and writing it and writing it, and it was a hot mess, but the ideas were there and the magical feel was there. And I joined a little local group that I don't know if they really exist now. It was called SNAFU, the Southern Nevada Area Fantasy Fiction Union. And I met him there. And he had read my first draft and gave me some feedback and helped me along. And eventually we were married. So in a way, this book really was instrumental in me rebuilding my life up after tragedy.
Then is your husband a writer also?
He is writing now. Yes, he is a writer. He is not yet published. He is working on a piece that takes place during World War II, and I'm very, very excited. He's getting serious about writing.
Good. Well, you mentioned he was part of a group that you were in, so I thought maybe he was writing then, and that was what he was doing in that group.
He was. The group was more fan based than an actual writers group at that time.
Did your being widowed have anything to do with your interest in thanatology, or were you already a thanatologist before you became widowed?
Well, I've always been interested in death and death cults and death rituals. And after I was widowed, I had joined a grief support group that was really well run and run by a Navy chaplain who did, I think, 7 tours of duty in Vietnam. Phenomenal human being. And after I had recovered and remarried, the group folded because of construction going on in the building. And then a few years later, they came back into being, and my husband sort of pushed me to co-facilitate. And I did, and it turned out I had a knack for dealing with people who are grieving. And I wanted to find a way to roll that into a profession. And I had seen an ad in one of our local papers for bereavement coordinator at one of the local hospices. And I called them up and said, I'm not really qualified for this, but what would I need to do to be qualified? And that's when I learned about thanatology. But they also wanted someone with a strong clinical background, like a marriage and family therapist or a licensed clinical social worker. So that became my to-do list for the next 5 years. And I chose social work because I already have a master's in anthropology and a strong background in the social sciences. And social work is the practical application of the social sciences. So it was a beautiful fit for me. And the thanatology piece is really wonderful. I'm certified through ADEC, the Association of Death Educators and Counselors, which is an amazing organization. And they do all sorts of research, and they're very on the ball with what they do. So I'm proud of that. It was very hard to get.
You know, I can relate to what you're saying because, and this is something I don't talk about on the show usually, but besides being a freelance writer and editor, I also happen to be an ordained minister. I don't
Ah.
have I don't have a church of my own. I belong to a church, but I'm not the minister there. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
freelance, but as a freelance I do weddings and funerals. And I prefer doing funerals than weddings. Now that may sound macabre to people. It won't to you. You're going to totally get what I'm saying. I
Mm-hmm.
feel that I'm being more of help. Anybody can make two people happy on the special day in their life when they get married. And that's not such a help, really. But I feel that I'm really helping people when I help them through bereavement by officiating at a funeral.
That's amazing. And one of the, as you know, super important aspects of grieving is finding meaningfulness. Not meaningfulness in a trivial way like everything happens for a reason, but death is so meaningless to us. We have so much is destroyed in our world, and how do we regain that back? So working in the field of death is incredibly meaningful and purposeful, and hats off to you for being there for people during these times. It is challenging, and it is rewarding the right word, Sin?
Yes,
What's
rewarding
the
is
right
the
word?
right word. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Juliet, before I jump to a commercial and bring on my next guest, please reiterate the title of your book, the spelling of it, and where people can buy it.
Absolutely. The title is Koyan, The Gods of Iniquity, and Koyan is spelled Koyaan. And I publish it under the name J. Alex Ruiz, and it is available on Amazon. You can either put in Koyan or J. Alex Ruiz, and it should pop up. If you put in Koyan, you'll get a lot of Koyaanisqatsi, which is the movie from which I've derived the name. And hopefully people who read it really enjoy it, and I look forward to getting feedback from anyone who cares to give it, and I hope it goes out there and finds its wings and does well.
Well, thank you very much, Juliet Ruiz, for being a great guest on the show. You were concerned because it was your first radio interview. You passed with flying colors, kid. You passed with
Awesome.
flying colors.
Well, thank you again, and thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity.
Well, thank you for being here. Good luck with your book, and I'm going to let you go now and tell our listeners before I bring our next guest, I tell them a little bit about one of Crimson Cloak's books. Remember, Crimson Cloak is the publisher that has fiction, nonfiction, for kids, for adults, everything except erotic romance. No erotic romance. And I don't think we have cookbooks yet, but stay tuned, we might. Meanwhile, everything else. So find Crimson Cloak at www.crimsoncloakpublishing.com. And this week we're featuring Nkosi Bandele's short novel Scot Free, which chronicles the life of New York City aspiring filmmaker Scotty Snow, who via a $99 Greyhound special shoots for the stars in Hollywood, but lands down and out in San Fran, literally on his knees, scrubbing toilet bowls, hence the nickname Scotty Tissues. The book is available on crimsoncloakpublishing.com or via Amazon at, and this is a long one, https://www.amazon.ae/Scott with two T's free hyphen Nkosi, that's NKOSI hyphen Bandili, BANDE, LE /D like in dog, P like in Peter, /168-160-5341, or again, it's going to be much easier to find it at www.crimsoncloakpublishing.com. And now it's time to bring on my next guest, Emily Bernath. Hi, Emily. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Emily Bernath has a passion for reaching out to women and guiding them to living out an identity rooted in truth. After being a rape survivor, she found her life quickly turning away from having everything she thought she wanted and toward feelings of both hopelessness and worthlessness. It was during that time and being open about her experience that it became apparent to her just how many other people experience those same feelings and so easily allow things that aren't true about them to define them. Her passion for wanting to take her outreach to women to the next level drove her toward writing the book she's here to talk about today, called Broken Lenses. She began to identify some of the most popular lies she saw and heard people believing about themselves. From her past experiences, she was able to find new life for herself in living her life for God. For that reason, she uses the Bible as the source of this book to provide truth for people to turn to during any time they may be seeing themselves falling into the traps of any of these lives. She lives to share her passion of empowering women to experience the freedom found from living in fullness of God's truth with all who God places in her path. She has spoken to and shared this passion with hundreds of people belonging to various faiths, age groups, and nations. Locally in Salt Lake Valley, she serves as a mentor to the next generation in youth ministry and speaks at numerous events in both the faith and the sexual assault arenas in the Salt Lake Valley. Globally, she has shared her passions through her humanitarian work in Eswatini, Africa, where she has gained a multicultural perspective of how the freedom from knowing God's truth manifests in others. Okay, Emily.
Hi.
So, how are you today? Are you well?
I am.
Good. Why did you begin writing?
Well, one day I had a conversation with a couple of women, and they approached me and said, Emily, we want you to think about leading a small group at the church. And that was pretty much it. They were just like, dream it up. What does it look like? You know, what kind of people do you want there? What time are you going to meet? What are you going to talk about? Those sort of things, right? And I guess I kind of just had this aha moment per se that I knew what I wanted to talk about in the group, and that if I was going to, move through with this message that I had, realized that I had to write it. And so that's where it began. I started writing these lessons that I thought I was going to lead a small group at, and the joke's on me because that group never happened. It turned into a lot more than what I thought I was doing to begin with.
Well, tell us about the book. Is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? What is it actually?
It's nonfiction. So chapter in it addresses a different truth. So chapter 1 is I am interesting. Chapter 2 is I am creative. I am enough. I am beautiful. So on and so forth. And then within each chapter, it attacks multiple different definitions of what does it mean to be an interesting person? What does it mean to be enough? And then kind of uses those definitions and aligns with the Bible. And, so in I Am Interesting, one of the lessons is, combating that we aren't boring. So how does the Bible prove that, if I'm really made in God's image, God isn't boring, I'm not boring, right? So digging deeper into what does that look like for me. And
what's the biggest challenge you experienced while writing?
Well, I would say originally at first it was just believing that I was even the right person to write the book. So, I pursued college and chemistry degree, and so seeing myself as a writer wasn't ever something that I, would have identified myself as, which, maybe I should take a dose of my own medicine at the book, because that's a lie, obviously, right?
Emily, you're coming over a little fuzzy. I think you're overamped. You want to turn your volume level down a little?
Sure, yeah. Is that better?
Yeah, that is a little better. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge originally was just believing I was the right person to write the book. I believed that the message was important, but I never saw myself as an author by any means. I was the math nerd growing up, the scientist, that's who I was and found my identity as. And so it took a lot of, tearing down lies in my own life to believe that this was really what God was calling me to do.
So Broken Lenses is your first book then?
Yes.
And what does the title mean?
So I guess throughout the course of writing the book, the working title changed a couple of times, but really the word that stuck with me throughout the whole process was the word lens, mainly because none of the chapters in the book are these like super revolutionary topics that we've never heard of, right? Like we've all known or have this idea of what it means to be beautiful or what it means to be interesting. So it's not looking at something new, it's just looking at it through a different lens or a perspective. And in the case of the book, the lens being the Bible or truth versus the broken lens that the world likes to tell us to look at ourselves through.
Is your book for both men and women or only primarily for women?
Yeah, I think it's a message definitely that everyone can resonate with. My personal passion and where it began from was definitely women's ministry, but I think the topics in the book are relevant to all humans, right? It's common things that we struggle with on a daily basis.
Who's your target reader? Who's the ideal person to buy this book?
I would, I definitely think it's ring more true for the younger adult audience, people who are really striving to figure out who they are, what they were made to do, right? So, that can happen at any stage in life, but definitely I think it's targeted more to the younger adult audience.
What do you enjoy most about being an author?
I enjoy meeting people. I'm the weird extrovert author. I don't know. I know most people picture introverts when they picture authors, but me, I love talking to the people. And so now that the book is released and I've been going on book tours, signing at Barnes and Noble and all these different states, it's just really cool to see and hear other people's stories. We're all made so differently and uniquely, and we've all got a story that no one else could tell. And so, yeah, that's my favorite part.
When you were growing up, did you have authorial ambitions?
No, absolutely not. I thought I was going to be like an accountant or something like that.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was never, I was actually told in college once in an English class by a professor that I didn't know how to grammatically put a sentence together. So that was never something that was spoken on to me that I would become an author someday.
How long did it take you to write the book, and how many hours a day do you write?
So it took me about 2.5 years to write the book. And, I would say at first, I, I wrote about 3 days a week when it was just more of like a leisurely thing. I would have to force myself out of the house because if I stayed at home, I would get distracted. And so I'd go to a coffee shop and work my 9 to 5 day job and write from, like 8 to 11 in the evening was the sweet spot. Go to bed and wake up and go to work the next day.
I hear you. Oh, God, do
Yep.
I hear you.
But, once I got more into it and realized that it was actually like a thing, it probably went more up to 5 days a week versus 3.
What do you hope people will get, readers of your book will get out of reading the book?
For me, the heart verse is really one of them, anyways. Is John 8:32, where it says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Right? Because I think there's just so much stuff in this world that we don't know whether to believe or not is true, and we just get weighed down by all these messages that we're hearing, and trying to live up to something that honestly doesn't even matter most of the time. So it's like, okay, who am I really? And where's the freedom that comes from living who God has made me to be versus who the world tells me I'm supposed to be?
What makes your book different from other books in this genre?
I would say one of the big things is that I come from a more technical background. I mean, I was saying earlier, I never saw myself as an author, so I did pursue, my bachelor's degree in chemistry. I've got my master's in business. Um, and so, I'm a big believer that science and God speak the same language. And so I kind of take a more analytical approach into, looking at the Bible and what does it really mean, and even in a sense taking a scientific method approach to it. It's like, all right, God, you're telling me this is true, but I'm going to test it out and see, like, there's one thing just reading it. There's another thing actually, like, actively living it out and discovering that truth for yourself too. So I do throw a few chemistry analogies in the book, talking about acid-base indicators and force and stuff like that. So I couldn't completely get rid of my nerd self when I wrote.
You have a laugh like a friend of mine.
Oh yeah.
She laughs like you laugh. Yes, yes. Are you writing another book now that this one's been published?
I am, yeah. So it's taking a similar theme as the first book. I wouldn't. People ask me if it's a sequel. Like, it's a sequel in the sense of, like, the theme is similar, but it's not like you have to read book 1 in order to read book 2 sort of sequel. There's probably a term for that. But yeah, so basically it's like book 1 is more about how I view myself. All the chapters start with I am, I am not. And in the second book, we're kind of flipping the perspective to others. How do I see them? So they are or they are not, whatever. Fill in the blank, right? So, yeah.
What were you doing with your life before you became a published author?
Yeah, so after I got my master's degree in business, I worked as a data analyst for a couple of years. So, living the corporate America life. Wasn't necessarily my passion, but that's just kind of what I thought that's what you do, right? You go to school, you get the job, you know,
Yeah, I know.
put in your years and you retire, right? No. So that's what I did. And I loved it while the season lasted, but I kind of like, uh, this is a little bit more known of a path. It's more fun.
Much more fun. Much more fun.
Yeah.
Are you an indie author, or do you have a regular publisher? And if so, who?
Yeah. So I have a publisher, Morgan James Publishing.
Who is that?
Morgan James Publishing.
Morgan James. I'm not familiar with them. Okay. And is your second book going to be with them too, or no?
Possibly, yeah. So I've had a really great experience with them and have nothing but good things to say. So I don't see why not, right?
Okay. And what advice do you have for other people listening who either are working on a book or thinking about working on a book or have ambitions to write a book?
Yeah. So I would say one of the biggest hurdles that I had to overcome when I was writing was just really believing that it was my story to tell. I wrestled with this a lot. I was like, even talking to my writing coach, I'd be like, all right, I get it. Like, I think that the lessons that are in this book are important, but like, why does it have to be me? Once I realized that I had to start writing my own personal story into the book, it got a lot harder for some reason. And I couldn't quite figure out why. I've been telling people about myself for my entire life. Why is it so hard to write this into my book, right? It was weird. I didn't expect that, but it really took having to believe that this was my message and that sure, someone else could try to tell a similar message, but at the end of the day, like, it's supposed to be coming from me, and I have a reason to be sharing this. So I guess just for other authors to recognize that, their input has value, and that, remove any of those false expectations that the world is trying to say your book has to be or whatever. It's, yeah.
Now, you're a rape survivor and you're open about it. Do you resonate with the Me Too movement? Does that talk to you?
Yeah, I definitely like that, the world is opening up a space for people to be comfortable, or at least more so, acceptable in sharing those experiences. Because honestly, and that was a while ago for me. It's changed so much since then, but I don't know. It's something that people, like, it's not their fault, right? It's not the victim's fault. Yet there's this stigma that we can't, open up and get help because we'll be looked upon it a certain way. So I definitely like that is creating a space for people to be more open and get the healing that they need from that,
What advice do you have for women who have been either raped or otherwise sexually abused?
I think at the end of the day, for me, it was knowing that I was still livable. Like, what had happened to me didn't affect my worth as a person. And nothing that happens on this earth can change anyone's worth in the eyes of God or his love for anybody. And that was really powerful for me because my own view of my worth and my love for myself definitely changed after that. And so knowing that it didn't change in the eyes of God was really, really powerful. And, I didn't overnight just all of a sudden become this like super Christian, but it did make me willing to seek out, okay, like, God, if you really do still love me and see me as valuable, like, how how can I find that for myself, and how do you how do you operate in that way, because I don't know how, right?
Emily, your website is www.emilybernath, and I'll spell Bernath, B like in boy, E like in evergreen, R like in Robert, N like in Nancy, A like in apple, T like in Tom, H like in Harriet, author, 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 Emily Bernath, author.com. And your book is available there, right? As well as anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You don't have to ma'am me, honey. Just my name will do. So can you read us a little bit from your book?
Yeah, what would you like? Yeah. I'll read out of the intro for you. It'll give you kind of a good feel for what to expect in the lessons of the book itself. So it says, who are we made to be? Our identity, our reason for being on this earth. We all have one. We all desire at some point in life to know our purpose. For any invention, innovation, or formula created, no one knows more about the purpose for creating them than their creator. In the case of every human being on this earth, that creator is God. God wants each of us to get to know him on an intimate level, and in doing so, we can also get to know ourselves. Acts 17:24-27 says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. In my own effort to seek and find God, he opened a door in my heart and gave me a very specific message to communicate. My hope is that this book provides a light to you and helps you learn and discover your true self. God made each of us the way we are for a specific purpose, and he desires nothing more than to have a relationship with every single person on this earth in order to show that purpose and the path he has for our lives. Proverbs 3:5-6 says to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. The world today surrounds us with distractions and tries to lead us away from the path God has for us. Some would say that the world is a really dark place. Although darkness exists, God promises to all who follow him that they will have the light of life. John 8:12 says that when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And when we have the light of life, darkness has no power over us. This means that Satan, being darkness, has no power over us when we are in God's light. He has no choice but to run away. James 4:7 says, submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Once we know the truth about who we are, we can live in freedom, the kind of freedom that can only be found in God and his truth. John 8:31-32 says, so Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, if you abide in me and my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So that's kind of a little bit about the backstory behind.
Good. Now we have just a few minutes left. Do you have any interesting stories to share with us? Either a funny story or a heartwarming story, any kind of a story to share?
About my writing or just myself? Or
About your writing, about your book, about any, anything related to your writing or your book or your life that would be interesting to my listeners?
Yeah, I mean, the whole process was kind of funny to me. I don't know. I was so blinded to all that God had in store for me for years. And it's actually that was never my intention to get published when I originally started writing. Like I said, it was only for the small group. But I ran into this girl one day, and I told her a little bit about the study I was writing, and she just looked me in the face. She took my phone and said, "I'm calling this lady. Your book's going to be the next bestseller. I'm getting you in touch with this person," who eventually became my writing coach. And it's funny because the joke's on me, because the book, when the ebook released in June, it actually hit #1 bestseller on Walmart's website. But I was so she told me this, and I was like, okay, this is weird. You're taking my phone and calling this lady. I have no idea what you're doing. But it was I don't know. It's just really awesome to see how God uses those around us, and already has this path laid out before we're even aware of what's going on, really. All he asks us to do is to have faith and to follow what he has for us. So I don't know, it's been really fun to just kind of grow into that calling, I guess, that God has set before me, even when I had no idea what I was doing. So I guess just reassurance to anyone that's out there, if you just feel like, I know what you're doing. I know what that feels like. And just trust the process and, believe that you have a place in this world and that your story has value.
Well, thank you very much, Emily Bernath, the author of Broken Lenses. Good luck with your book. Good luck with your future writing. Come back and visit us again when your next book comes out. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, folks, time to wrap up. Time for me to remind you that the program is brought to you by Crimson Cloak Publishing for a wide variety of books, both fiction and nonfiction, and for children and for adults, featuring this week Scot Free by Nkosi Bandili. But we've got a ton of books of all kinds for you to find on our website, www.crimsoncloakpublishing.com. I'm Cynthia MacGregor, reminding you, as always, to pass a smile along. I'll see you back here next week, same time, with more exciting, interesting guests. Till then, bye now.
You have been listening to In the Spotlight with your host, Cynthia MacGregor, brought to you by Crimson Cloak Publishing. For a wide variety of books for both adults and children in print, ebook, and audio formats, join us every Tuesday at the same time as In the Spotlight brings you interesting guests who entertain and enlighten you. I'm Carly McCracken. On behalf of Crimson Cloak Publishing, thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next week.